Dave Weixelman is a retired botanist with the U.S. Forest Service, where he worked for 37 years. He has been an amateur astronomer, well, 38 years now. We wrote this last year. Oh, maybe not, not counting right. He has been an amateur astronomer since the seventh grade when he ground a mirror and built an 8-inch reflector telescope. He last spoke in February last year on the Great Rift in the summer Milky Way. If you want to go to the website and check that talk out, there are great photos and other images there, and plus his talk. He has seen a total of six. He has seen six total solar eclipses, starting with the July 10th, 1972 eclipse, when he traveled to Nova Scotia just out of high school. Dave is an amateur astronomer interested in eclipses, astrophotography, and comet observing. So let's welcome Dave.
In case you haven't heard, there is a total eclipse of the sun on April 8th, 2024. Us and millions of others are well aware of that. It'll be visible in all of the contiguous USA. So at least there'll be a partial eclipse in all of the contiguous USA. In the path of totality, in the eastern US and Mexico, they will see a total eclipse. A total eclipse is often described as the most awesome sight you can see in the sky. How many people here have seen a total eclipse? Okay, well, 3/4. That's great. I've seen 6, but that pales in comparison to Dave Bukla, who's on the Zoom call, who has seen 16. He tells me only 1 was clouded out, and he's seen 2 annulars. So congratulations, Dave. That's a remarkable amount. I remember in the mid 70s and early college days, looking at all the ephemerises and the maps and saying, wow, that's in that 2017 eclipse in Oregon, and then the 2024 through the US, that's going to be an amazing time. But it's so far away, I wouldn't even, I wouldn't even think that it's too far away. Well, it's here, so that's funny how that works. So here's the path of totality for April 8th. It starts, the moon shadow first hits land in Mexico near Mazatlan, and then cruises up towards the USA border in Texas. And our group is going to be about right in here. Can you see my cursor okay? Okay. And then goes up through Texas. Dallas is in the path of totality, as you saw in that earlier presentation, which was really good, by the way. And skims up northeastward towards the Cleveland area. Cleveland is in the path of totality. And then Montreal is also in the path, and then skips out into the North Atlantic past Nova Scotia in Canada. And here's some of the circumstances of the April 8th, 2024 eclipse. Here you can see the path of totality again. But also, this clearly shows the area where the penumbra of the moon will hit the Earth. That is where a partial eclipse is seen. So this whole area here, if I can get my cursor going, there we go. It's outlined by blue here. That is where a partial eclipse will hit the Earth. And Nevada City is about right in here, okay? And Nevada City will see a partial eclipse that day. About 45% of the sun will be obscured there at mid-eclipse for Nevada City. And I've got a couple slides on that coming up. So greatest eclipse, where there's the longest totality, is here in Mexico, just south of the US border. And that totality length is 4 minutes and 28 seconds, which is quite a good long eclipse. So again, that's the path. And if anybody has any questions, just holler out. This is informal. Just let me just ask questions. So that's the circumstances of the eclipse. There's a lot of information on here. This is in Saros series 139, member 30 of 71. We'll talk about the Saros here in a little bit and what that is. Interesting facts about this eclipse. There's a tremendous a number of people that live in or near the path of totality. Over 31 million people reside within the path of totality in the US, compared to 12 million during the 2017 total eclipse. A lot more people are going to see this eclipse than in 2017. The 2024 eclipse will last nearly twice as long as the 2017 eclipse. That'll attract more people as well. Nearly all of North America, except for Alaska, will have an opportunity to view at least a partial eclipse. And in terms of length of totality, which is a maximum of 4 minutes, 24 seconds in the USA, this is the finest total eclipse of the sun for the United States between the years 1806 and 2045. So kind of a big deal. The 2045 one is longer. So yeah, interesting. Yes. Varies from about its average width is about 110 miles. So yeah, that's about the average width. Now, Michael Zeiler on his Great American Eclipse.com, has published a number of maps which shows the population in the eastern US that's going to be affected by the eclipse. And he says half of the US population lives within 250 miles of the path. So that's pretty significant. And then he's charted as far as driving time, how far away certain parts of the population are. How many people live inside or near the path of totality of the solar eclipse? Again, Michael has published these maps. 31.6 million people live inside the path of totality of this solar eclipse. Okay, and then 75.3 million people live within 100 miles of the path. So pretty significant. So yeah. Eclipse safety. Let's just mention this right off the bat. Looking directly at the sun is unsafe, and except during the total phase of totality. So if you don't have your eclipse glasses, get them now. If you don't have your solar filters for your scopes or cameras, get them now. Solar glasses can be purchased from, here's a couple of sources. GreatAmericanEclipse.com sells them, and Celestron.com also. There are other vendors that sell these eclipse glasses and filters for lenses as well. So anyway, if you haven't got them already, now's a good time. So why do eclipses occur? A solar eclipse happens when the moon passes between the sun and the earth, blocking at least some of the sun and casting a shadow on the earth, as in this diagram. We'll talk about the two types of shadows that are cast by the moon. One is the umbral shadow, where a total eclipse can be seen. And the other one is the penumbral shadow, where there's a partial eclipse. So Nevada City then is in the penumbral shadow. Since it's going to see a partial eclipse, it is not within the path of totality, which is where the umbra occurs. Okay. So why do eclipses occur? Solar and lunar eclipses happen because the moon revolves around the earth. And here's a difference between solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. So here's the moon rotating around the earth here, revolving around the earth. When the moon is between the earth and the sun, of course, that is a new moon. And the moon casts its shadow on the earth and therefore blocking the sun. For a lunar eclipse, the moon is on the opposite side of the sun and the earth's shadow then blocks the moon. Solar eclipses only occur during the new moon when the moon and sun are aligned on the same side of the earth. The time it takes for the new moon from new moon to new moon is 29.53 days. This is called the synodic month, new moon to new moon. Keep that in mind because we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So there's a new moon every month, but we don't see an eclipse every month. So why is that? And here's a graphic from Dave Buchla, which I borrowed. And this shows why we don't see an eclipse every new moon. That's because the lunar orbit here is inclined 5 degrees with respect to the ecliptic. The plane of the ecliptic is that plane where the Earth orbits around the sun. But since the lunar orbit here is inclined 5 degrees, then sometimes it doesn't line up with the sun. It doesn't block out the sun. The moon must be near one of the nodes, and these are called nodes here, lined up with the sun in order to block the sun. So notice where the moon's orbit crosses the ecliptic, that's the plane of the sun and the earth. So when the moon crosses into the ecliptic, which is right here, it's crossing through a node. Okay. So during the new moon, the moon usually passes above or below the sun, and its shadow misses the earth. So here's a larger view. Here's the moon orbiting around the earth. And notice there's that 5-degree inclination there. In this case, the moon is too low and the shadow misses the Earth. However, when the moon is here, in this area, when the Earth is here, the moon is crossing through the plane of the ecliptic, and the shadow can hit the Earth. Okay, so does that make sense? At this time of year here, then, when the Earth is over here, the moon is too high, and the shadow misses the Earth. Back over here, now the moon is at the node again, and it is lined up with the sun, and the shadow can hit the Earth, so an eclipse can occur. So there are only 2 times a year called the eclipse seasons, which are here and here, that last 37.5 days when the new moon crosses the Earth-Sun ecliptic plane and provides an opportunity for an eclipse. So these positions are called nodes. So that's important. The moon has to be not only new, but it has to be at one of the nodes where it's actually lined up with the solar and Earth ecliptic plane. It's usually not. So that's why eclipses don't occur at every new moon. Any questions? So that's a big deal. The inclination of the orbit of the moon, 5 degrees, is a big deal. That's why we don't see eclipses every new moon. Another factor to consider is the size of the moon. The lunar orbit is an ellipse, and the moon can appear larger when it's closer to the Earth, near perigee, or smaller when it's farther from the Earth, and that's called apogee. Only when the moon's apparent size is larger than the sun's apparent size do we even see an eclipse. So not only does it have to be a new moon, but it has to be on the perigee side of its orbit, in other words, closer, so that it can totally block the sun. And now it's the ancient Chaldeans in ancient Babylonia, some 2,500 years ago, discovered that eclipses happened on a cycle. They studied lunar eclipses, but the principles apply to both lunar and solar eclipses. What they found was every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, a nearly identical total eclipse occurred, with the moon at about the same node. Remember, we talked about nodes, at nearly the same distance and at about the same time of year. This is called the Saros cycle. The Saros cycle is based on the following conditions. It has to be a new moon. The new moon has to arrive at one of those nodes, that is on the plane of the Earth's sun, and the moon has to be large enough to completely block out the sun. Those conditions happened on a regular cycle of 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. It turns out that the Saros cycle is also exactly 223 synodic months. Recall that the synodic month is the time from new moon to new moon. So that's the Saros cycle. Now, I was going to give an example here of Saros 136. Because the Saros period is not equal to a whole number of days, that extra 1/3 day displacement means that the Earth must rotate an additional 8 hours or 120 degrees with each cycle. The extra 8 days means that the subsequent eclipse in the same Saros will shift 127 degrees. For example, the eclipse on June 30th, 1973, which is this line right here, it's going through Africa, shifted 120 degrees west for the eclipse on July 11th, 1991. Okay, and so that's interesting. I was on the offshore of and saw the 73 eclipse, and I believe Dave Buchla did too. And I also saw the subsequent eclipse in that same Saros in 1991 in Masalan. The next solar eclipse of April 8th, 2024 belongs to Saros 139 and is number 30 of 71 eclipses in that series. The next eclipse is the total eclipse on August 12th, 2026. That eclipse belongs to Saros 126 and is number 48 of 72. So quiz time, when is the next eclipse in Saros 139? How would you figure that out? You would figure that out because Saros eclipses are separated by the 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. So all you have to do then is add that number of years and days to April 8th, 2024, and there will be an eclipse. There will be an eclipse, guaranteed. Imagine if you're in ancient Babylonia and you told people that in 18 years and so many days and so many hours, there's going to be another eclipse. I think they'd be pretty popular if that actually happened. So anyway, that's the Saros cycle. Okay, a Saros lifetime. Just make a brief note on Saros here. A Saros series does not last indefinitely because the moon's node shifts ever so slightly with each eclipse. A Saros series typically lasts 12 or 13 centuries and contains 70 or more eclipses. Eclipses that take place at the ascending node, moon's ascending node, have odd Saros numbers. Each succeeding eclipse in a series shifts southward with respect to the center of the Earth. This means that the eclipses start at the North Pole and progress through the equator and ends at the end of the Saros at the South Pole 12 or 13 centuries later. So anyway, the Saros is an interesting way to organize eclipses into eclipse families. And that was the earliest sort of model that people had, that ancients had, to actually predict celestial events like eclipses. And today, modern day astronomers, they don't predict eclipses using a Saros. They actually have complex algorithms and computations to predict eclipses. But Saros was sort of the first time that humans actually realized there was a cycle of these eclipses. And okay, there's 4 types of eclipses: the total solar eclipse, which we just talked about, where the moon's large enough to obscure the sun. There's an annular eclipse, which happened last October here in the United States, where the moon is not at perigee, it's more at apogee, and it's farther away, so it looks smaller and doesn't completely cover the sun. That's called an annular eclipse. And then, of course, a partial eclipse. There's another eclipse called a hybrid eclipse that actually has a total and an annular phase both in the same eclipse. And I can try maybe real quick to try to explain that. But what happens is in the hybrid or annular total eclipses, when the eclipse starts, can you see my cursor there by the, okay. So here's the umbra where you could see a total eclipse, okay. But notice that umbra doesn't quite hit the Earth. What hits the Earth is the antumbra, where the moon is just a little bit too small to completely cover the sun. You're not close enough to the moon to make it that end up big enough, okay. But as that eclipse progresses along the globe of the Earth, the actual curvature of the Earth brings you closer to the moon. So totality occurs. That's really cool. And then as the eclipse progresses, again, you get farther away from the moon as you get towards the end of the eclipse, as the eclipse skips off the Earth. And now you're too far away over here to see totality. So that's a hybrid eclipse. And the last one was 2023 in Australia and Indonesia. I think Dave Bukla saw that eclipse. I did not make it there. But those are fascinating events, partly because when you're at totality in a hybrid eclipse, the moon and the sun are very nearly exactly the same size. And that allows you to see different phenomenon than when the moon is quite a bit bigger than the sun, like it's going to happen on April 4th.
So there must be one place or maybe 2 places where you can see it from that one place evolve from one type to the other, if you're right on the edge.
Yeah, so there's just a narrow arc of the Earth where that totality occurs. Everywhere else, annular. So at the both ends of that path, it's annular, but toward the middle third or so, usually it's total.
So it has to be around noon then, for that to happen, doesn't it? Or is that nothing to do with it?
Well, noon local time, I would think so, yes.
And what did you call that, the shadow when it's too small?
Antumbra. Well, there's the umbra, which was where you see totality. Then if you're past the umbra, you're into the antumbra, which is where a annular eclipse. So last October, when I was in Utah, standing there looking at the annular eclipse, I was in the antumbra. Okay. By a remarkable coincidence, when totality occurs and that moon is almost exactly the same size as the sun, that's quite the coincidence, and it really is. The sun's diameter is 865,000 miles, or about 400 times the diameter of the moon. But the sun is also on average about 400 times farther away. As a result, the two bodies appear almost exactly the same angular size in the sky, about half a degree. Okay, that's a remarkable coincidence. Where else in the universe does that? I mean, somewhere, but it's pretty remarkable. So for the eclipse on April 8th, Nevada City is in the penumbral shadow. So before we had mentioned that there is an umbral shadow where you see totality, but outside of that, there's the penumbral shadow where the moon doesn't quite exactly line up with the sun. And that means you're going to see a partial eclipse, which is where Nevada City is. So in Nevada City, the local circumstances are this. And if you want to take a picture of the screen, whatever, it's going to start at 10:18 a.m. local time here in Nevada City, Grass Valley area. Middle of the eclipse is at 11:17 and ends at 12:21. 45% of the sun will be covered at mid-eclipse. Solar glasses must be worn for the entire eclipse because there will be a segment of the sun always showing. Altitude of the sun at mid-eclipse is going to be 50 degrees in the sky, and the azimuth of the sun at mid-eclipse is 135, so roughly southeast. So here's the path of totality, and Nevada City, of course, is way over here, where about 45% of the sun will be obscured.
What was the altitude again?
It was 50 degrees, so just above 45. Okay. So let's go now to the path of totality. The weather forecast for the path of totality by Jay Anderson, a famous eclipse weather forecaster, goes like this. Mexico and southern Texas are favored, and this is April in the U.S., so springtime, whereas, of course, the northeast U.S. is not as favorable. And so most people are going to travel, if they can travel, will be traveling to Texas. And that's why you hear so much news about Texas. So here's a map by Michael Zeiler on greatamericaneclipse.com, which shows the path again. The longest eclipse duration is 4 minutes, 27 seconds near the town of Nazas, Durango, south of the border. Okay, it shows the speed of the moon's shadow. This totality is wrong here, but there's the time, local time for that particular town. Then as the path moves up over Dallas, totality actually shortens by a few seconds, and it's going to get shorter as you go along the path. So there's the situation in Dallas. Then as the shadow skips over the Nova Scotia area, you're down to 3 minutes, 7 seconds. So that's another reason why people are flocking to Texas area, where you have over 4 minutes of totality. And a number of people are going to Mexico as well. But in the US, if you're going to stay in the US, then Texas has the longest totality. Stages of a solar eclipse. Okay, first contact is what they call it when the moon first touches the sun. For most locations, the partial phases will last about 70 to 80 minutes. And of course, you must be wearing eclipse glasses when viewing the sun during the partial phases. So there's a notch out of the sun. Ballard Bear gave us this beautiful photograph of the first contact. As the moon advances across the sun, here's a photo showing about 75% coverage. Another beautiful photo by Ballard. And I show this because at the 75% mark, when the sun covers about 75% of the moon, I think you can really start to notice that the light begins to dim and things are changing, and it's getting a little bit cooler. Shadows around you become sharper because the sun is approaching sort of like a point source, right? And again, you must be wearing your eclipse glasses when viewing the sun during the partial eclipse. I kind of mention this again because I had a sister-in-law. She was wearing sunglasses around a loop around her neck, as well as eclipse glasses on a loop, separate loop around her neck. She mistakenly grabbed the sunglasses at one point and put them up and then looked at the sun instead of looking through her eclipse glasses. And she quickly, of course, realized what was going on. But those are the kind of things that can happen if you're not careful. So there's a phenomenon that's called just before second contact, just before the moon completely covers the sun, where the sunlight is shining through small valleys at the edge of the moon. And these are called Bailey's beads, named after the British astronomer Francis Bailey. These beads of light appear around the edge of the moon during the seconds leading up to totality and just after. Bailey's beads are caused by sunlight passing through valleys and between mountains on the moon's irregular surface. And then right after Bailey's beads, will begin to disappear until eventually only a single bright spot will remain along the edge of the moon's shadow. This bright spot resembles a diamond in the sky formed by the rest of the sun's atmosphere, the last remaining bit of the atmosphere. Totality is almost here, but you must keep your glasses on during the diamond ring. Finally, we have second contact, which is where the moon fully covers the sun and the solar corona appears. And here's a beautiful photo by Dave Buchla. Once the diamond ring disappears and there's no longer any direct sunlight, you may remove your sunglasses and look at the total eclipse with the naked eye. And again, this moment is called second contact. During totality, you may see the chromosphere, which is a thin red line just at the edge of the moon there. And that's the solar atmosphere appearing as a thin circle of pink around the moon. And you'll also see the corona appearing as streams of white light here as this corona appears with beautiful festoons and it's like a white pearly glow around the moon. The solar corona is composed of plasma and extends millions of kilometers into space. The sun's intense blindness hides it during the day, but it is visible during totality. The corona appears as a halo of blue-white, wispy light surrounding the dark silhouette of the moon. During totality, it's wonderful to look at your surroundings and people's reactions because people are cheering or they're just in awe. And you can listen for animal sounds. For example, in 1979 in Montana, I was near a horse corral. And as soon as totality started, the horses just went up on their hind legs and were just going nuts. They all nearly broke down the edges of the corral. They were totally freaked out. I mean, so wide field photos that can help capture the scene as well. At left is a painting by Robin Hart that captures the scene at the 2017 total eclipse. It's a beautiful painting. Here's a nice photo by Dave Buchla showing what a wide angle shot can show. It looks like he was on the deck of a ship here, but a beautiful photo. Sun's chromosphere. The sun's atmosphere has three layers: the photosphere, which is the surface that we can see, and just above that is the chromosphere, and then the corona. The chromosphere, which gives out a reddish glow, can only be seen for a few seconds right after the diamond ring disappears, but can be photographed during totality with very short exposures. Here's also a photo from the International Space Station showing the umbral shadow of the moon on the Earth. Really, really cool. Shadow bands. Some of you may have heard about shadow bands. They're just before totality and after totality, you may see moving wavy lines of alternate light and dark on plain colored surfaces. They resemble the bands of light and dark that you can see on the bottom of a swimming pool sometimes. These shadow bands are the result of light emitted from a thin solar crescent being refracted by the Earth's atmosphere. I have seen them once on the deck of a ship in 1973. The ship had a light gray paint on the floor of the ship. And all of a sudden, right before totality, I was aware of shadow bands, but these were very, very obvious. And they were rippling and they were moving about a foot or two per second. And everybody was just aided by these rippling waves going over them. It was really interesting. But I haven't seen any since then. But you really need to put down, if you're serious about seeing shadow bands, a white sheet on the ground, at least a couple of meters in diameter, so that you can really add to the contrast. But again, it's a phenomenon where the sun is acting almost like a pinpoint. It's being refracted through the turbulence in the Earth's atmosphere. Very interesting effect. And you never know how bright they're going to be or dim they're going to be, or not at all. And then as the moon continues to move across the face of the sun, you'll see a brightening on the opposite side from where the diamond ring shone at the beginning. Okay, this is the atmosphere of the sun starting to peek through behind the moon. It's your signal to stop looking directly at the eclipse and put your eclipse glasses back on. Okay, so this is another diamond ring occurs when the first flash of sunlight appears around the edges of the moon. This moment is called third contact. So the moon is moving away from the sun. And then once your eyes are protected again, you will again see the diamond ring, Bailey's beads, and shadow bands all in reverse. Okay, and this is fourth contact. Fourth contact is the moment when none of the sun is covered by the moon's shadow, and the eclipse is completely over. Here's another beautiful shot by Dave Buchla of the diamond ring. And the corona shape. So the corona shape differs according to the solar cycle. At maximum, the the corona can have a very symmetrical appearance, like here on the left. And that's the sort of corona we expected April 8th, because we are near solar mass. In 2017, the corona was was actually asymmetrical, with these long helmet streamers coming off the equatorial plane, and that was the corona we saw at 2017, rather asymmetrical. The magnetic fields in the corona give these fantastic streamer-like features that we see in the corona. All these helmet features and stuff like that, and plumes and festoons and all that. All that complex behavior is because of the magnetic fields on the sun. And here's a eclipse photo from 2017 that I processed to try to bring out what the eclipse sort of looks like to the naked eye. This is a stack of 12 exposures ranging from about 1,000th of a second to about a half second. And you can see these tenuous streamers in the Milky Way and some of these fine polar brush details here in the corona. It's one of the things that makes the corona so spectacular. But the corona is quite dim, and the finely detailed coronal streamers and plumes can be seen only during totality with the naked eye. This image was processed to approximate what the eye sees at totality. The corona reaches extremely high temperatures. However, the corona is very dim. Why is that? Because the corona is about 10 million times less dense than the sun's surface. This low density makes the corona much less bright than the surface of the sun. And I'm going to go into photography just a little bit here, not really in depth, but just touch on a few things. If you're interested in photographing the eclipse, whether partial phases or totality, I highly recommend Alan Dyer's book, ebook on photographing solar eclipses. His website is amazingsky.com, and Alan does a tremendous job. I email him quite a bit, and he's a Canadian astrophotographer, and he's really good. And this is just an amazing book. Alan Dyer, amazingsky.com. Another source for photographic information is Fred Espinak's website here at mysteryeclipse.com. It's got everything about eclipses and is also an excellent source of information for photographing the solar eclipse. Camera lenses for solar filters, made for camera lenses for the partial phases. A couple of sources include MrStarGuy.com, and you can find all sorts of solar filters for various lens diameters and so forth from that source. Thousand Oaks Optical is another source for solar filters for camera lenses. And that's for the partial phases. Again, for the totality, you can take your camera lens filter off and just photograph straight through. You don't need a filter. And here's a few tips that I thought were really good from Dave Buchla sent me some tips, and his experience here really shows. Use only manual focus and settings. Shoot raw mode for later processing. For tripod stability, avoid extending more than necessary, especially the center column. Add weight to stabilize the tripod. Use a cable release or some sort of program setting so that you're not touching the camera when you set off the exposure. Maximum recommended exposure in seconds are calculated by using 340 divided by the focal length in millimeters. So this will keep the subject from trailing in the sky due to the Earth's rotation. Use live view in silent mode if available to minimize shutter slap if you're using a single lens reflex camera. And a tracking mount is useful to avoid field rotation if you plan to do HDR stacking. Hence for first timers, spend time watching this amazing spectacle with your eyes. If you are spending it looking through a viewfinder, why bother going? Try to spend a few seconds looking around and taking in the scene. So really good advice from Dave Buchla. Here's a beautiful photo that he sends as well. Now here's a table that you can, either Dave can send you, or it's also available, I think, on Fred Espinak's website, mysteryeclipse.com. But here's some recommended exposures for various eclipse phenomena. For example, if you're going to want to photograph the diamond ring at ISO 400 with your camera, and you set the camera at f4, f-stop, take about 1,000th of a second, and that'll do a nice job on the diamond ring. So some guidelines here for photographing the eclipse. Here's an example of photograph. Here's another Dave Bukla. This is his diamond ring photo. This is f4.5, 1/1600th of a second, ISO 500 at 420 millimeters with a Canon 5D. Okay. Now here's a single exposure of the corona that Dave took at f5.6, 1/4 second, ISO 800, 400 millimeters. But what's interesting about this, notice that the inner corona is overexposed. Well, Dave solved that because he stacked several exposures here and got this result, much more detail in the inner corona by stacking a number of exposures. And that's what a lot of experienced eclipse photographers do, is they stack exposures of different lengths, and that gives you a better dynamic range of the corona. Because it's quite bright near the limb of the moon, and then becomes quite dim as you go out. So there's quite a bit of dynamic range in that corona. And we always look forward. The next solar eclipse is August 12th, 2026. Okay, maximum totality 2 minutes and 18 seconds. Not nearly as long as this one, and not as quite as accessible unless you're in Europe. But anyway, it starts near the North Pole, skims across eastern Greenland, and touches Iceland, and then goes through northern Spain. So that's the next one. There's not a total eclipse in 2025. So if you're looking past 2024, that's the next one. Some solar eclipse resources here. GreatAmericanEclipse.com is Michael Zeiler's excellent website. Has a lot of information about the 2024 eclipse. Astronomy.com is the astronomy magazine website. SkyAndTelescope.com is the Sky and Telescope site. And American Astronomical Society has an excellent site as well. Fred Espinak's website, eclipsewise.com, that I mentioned earlier. And eclipsophile.com, a website by Jay Anderson, has a really good weather information for the upcoming eclipse. I'm just going to end it right there. That's what I've got. Thanks for listening.
How did the Babylonians figure out that there was a cycle? Because they were living in one place. Did they hear from a place that was, a few hundred miles away and then a few hundred miles?
Because the same principles apply to lunar eclipses. And all that you need to watch a lunar eclipse is on one side of the Earth. You don't need to be in that strip. And so they followed lunar eclipses, did their calculations, and they transferred that information over to the sun, and it worked. So
that's why.
The same cycle, it says, well, maybe it works the same way.
Yes, and it does. It does.
Pretty smart.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to wait a dozen cycles to come up with a
Exactly.
pattern.
So that's a great question. Because if they had just, if it was only unique to solar eclipses, oh yeah, I mean, it would take
How'd you know?
centuries to figure
You
that
have
out.
to be
You'd have
like a
to live
wagon
centuries.
train going in one direction, for 19 years.
So yeah, that's why.
Dave,
yes,
one point I was going to add is on the 2017 eclipse, I took my 6-inch binoculars, the only time I've ever been able to do that. And the view through the binoculars during totality, with no filter, of course, was phenomenal. It sort of blew me away. I knew I would see more of the corona, but I was really surprised at the structure I could see. So I am taking the 6-inch binoculars to the Texas eclipse, but I think even small binoculars, not filtered, but obviously don't look during partial phases, but during totality, I think is worth having a glimpse of the corona.
I think
So,
that's
I mean,
great.
The
Great
second,
advice.
the second thing I was going to mention, with a long eclipse like this, at the start of the eclipse, you will see the surface of the sun, give me a name, but anyway, the surface of the sun on one side, and just before the second diamond ring, the surface of the sun will show up just before the diamond ring does on the other side. It won't be a symmetrical event because the moon's moving across the sun, so you'll see it on one side and then on the other. You might not notice that on a short eclipse, but a longer eclipse, I've seen that. And finally, one thing on the shadow bands. I saw shadow bands a couple of times, once on the beach in Russia, and I wasn't even looking for them. And somebody that was on the same beach we were yelled out shadow bands, and we looked down and they were going all the way across the beach. And one of the things I've often done was lay out a sheet to look for shadow bands. Half the time I forget to look for them because everything else is happening. And I was going to say, I don't think a sheet, in my view, is big enough. You might, I haven't actually ever seen them on a sheet. The second time I saw them was in the Australia eclipse. I saw them on the side of the ship. And again, if you happen to see them or somebody in your group that's watching, you kind of alert everybody to yell it out so other people will look and see it, because it would be very easy to miss, but they are kind of interesting.
Hi, Dave. This is Al. Good to hear you. Could you just explain that again about what you were saying about the surface of the sun?
Well, the surface that you see just before the diamond ring, you're seeing the orange color of the sun showing up where the diamond ring will be. You can see that if you look at some of the pictures. I don't know if Dave wants to back up, but if you see a picture of that, you'll see the reddish color of the surface, and it typically is not all the way around the sun. You're only going to see it not too well on that one or that one. A little bit there. See, just before the prominence on the right of the diamond ring, right up in there. Yes. But you'll notice that the other side of the sun, opposite to the diamond ring, too much of the moon is covering that area and you don't see it at all. But at the second instance of a diamond ring, you'll see the surface show up just before the diamond ring does, if you're looking for it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dave.
I remember from a partial eclipse here several years ago, I forget how long ago, that you could see diffraction patterns coming through the oak trees as the leaves were blocking it, and you got all kinds of these diffraction patterns on the ground from the trees.
Yeah.
Because it was more of a point source, I guess.
Yeah, and then you can, through the gaps in the leaves, you can see tiny crescent suns sometimes during the partial phases. It's interesting. Thanks, Dave, for that input. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Any other comments, questions, additions? Who's all going to see the 2024? Okay, at least half. Okay, great. Wonderful.
Thank you, Dave.